Next, I'm going to briefly mention some other unicellular algae. There are the silicoflagellates. So these are also made of silica, similar to diatoms, but they obviously have a very different body shape and some other differences as well. Hi, yes, hello. Then you have one of my favorites, the coccolithophorids. These are, again, single cell algae that make these little calcium carbonate plates. These are the ones that were responsible for the White Cliffs of Dover. I mentioned them before. And then cryptophytes, which are another type of single-celled algae that don't have as much of a like shell on them. So they're a little different. But all of them are photosynthesizers. So, hi. Um, One of the reasons so many of these organisms are very important is for primary productivity. I already mentioned this in my ecology lecture, but primary productivity is the rate at which energy is converted into organic substances. We usually talk about this for photosynthesis, right, where sunlight is getting converted into like sugars and other organic matter that can then move up the food chain. Another concept I want to emphasize here is net productivity. This is the carbon, organic matter that is gained during photosynthesis minus carbon and organic matter that is lost through respiration. Because basically, if we're talking about just sugars, for example, some of the sugar, the sugar is going to be created by photosynthesis, but then some of it is going to get used up by the respiration that the phytoplankton is doing, because it's also going to be like spending the energy of that sugar to do all its little cellular jobs in its body. So net primary productivity is like what's left over after the phytoplankton has done all of its respiration and cellular work that it needs to do. It's basically the organic matter that's like available to the next level of the food chain. So what limits productivity? Why, productivity is obviously higher in some areas, lower in other areas, and you can't just have infinite growth of phytoplankton. So what are some limits on how much phytoplankton, how much productivity we can get? A big one is light, because of course we need light for photosynthesis. You can have seasonal light limitation at high latitudes. Areas that are close to the poles during the winter, it'll be very, very dark for like most of the day. So that can be very limiting to phytoplankton, where they can't grow because there's just very little sunlight. The other limiter for light is depth and turbidity. So, of course, as you go down into the water, eventually it gets dark, right? Eventually there's no light. And the distance you have to go down before it gets dark depends mostly on turbidity. Remember, turbidity is basically how cloudy is the water. So if you have like crystal clear Caribbean pool water, you might be 200 feet down and you still have enough light for photosynthesis. But if we're talking about like our water here in the Pacific, which is more eutrophic and higher turbidity, or if there's like a lot of sediment that's like, been stirred up in an area, then it might only be like a foot before it gets, or like maybe like more like 10 feet, maybe only 10 feet down, it'll start getting a little too dark for photosynthesis. The depth, how deep it is before, you run out of light for photosynthesis depends a lot on the turbidity of the water. Now, the depth where the photosynthesis equals respiration, we call that the compensation depth. You can see that depicted in this graph here. So respiration rate is always pretty much the same because there's always like a certain amount of carbon, of sugar, of energy that the phytoplankton cells need to spend, again, in order to like stay alive for their own personal metabolism. That's pretty constant. There's not much change in that. But the rate of photosynthesis will depend on, for example, light, how much light is available. So you can see you can do a lot of photosynthesis near the surface, but then as you're getting deeper and deeper, it's getting darker and darker. So you can do less and less photosynthesis, the rate's going down. And eventually the rate crosses with this line is crossing with this line. So now, once you pass this point, now photosynthesis, the rate of photosynthesis is lower than the respiration rate. That means the net productivity would be negative. So basically, below the compensation depth, there is no net productivity, aka, or more accurately, net productivity is negative. So you're actually making less sugar than you're spending if you're a phytoplankton. So, kind of putting these concepts together, if water in an area has higher turbidity, how would that affect the compensation depth?